Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Pulp Kitchen, where we will be reviewing A Real Pain and The Rings of Power Season 2. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't caught up with episode 149, go check it out. It's out now. We reviewed Megalopolis, A Different Man, and Rebel Ridge. But today, let's talk about A Real Pain, which comes out in the UK cinemas in January. It's directed and starring Jesse Eisenberg and also Kieran Culkin, about two Jewish American cousins who travel to Poland to take part of a historic tour retracing their heritage, specifically their grandmother's heritage, and her journey that she took out of Poland during the Holocaust. And you have these two different characters. Jesse Eisenberg, shocker, plays a uptight, neurotic, fastidious, fast-talking guy. A very good performance, don't get me wrong. I just think it's just quite funny. Yeah. Meanwhile, Kieran Culkin plays a kind of Roman adjacent, when I say Roman, I mean Roman from Succession, adjacent kind of character who is quippy and funny.
Also like Kieran Culkin in
also
real life
quite like Kieran Culkin, but plays the other cousin who is clearly had something in his past that has affected him. Their lives are very different, but he is. We're quickly introduced through Jesse Eisenberg's eyes that Kieran Culkin should be a kind of chaotic, not very reliable kind of person. But we begin the film and he's there at the airport. He's ready to go. He's sorted everything. He's looking forward to this trip. So you have these very two different character types. They used to be very close as cousins, and now they have kind of drifted apart. They're kind of the same age. They're actually saying they were born like a week apart. And they have reacted to the death of their grandmother about a year or so before very differently, but they are embarking on this family trip together. When they get to Poland, they're joined on this small tour by a couple of other characters, one played by Jennifer Grey from Dirty Dancing. Do you realize that? And also an actor who is in House of the Dragon, who I really like. He's got a wonderful voice. He plays the Rwandan who converted to Judaism. Also, Will Sharp is in it as the Yorkshire group leader, Will Sharp from White Lotus.
He does lots of interesting stuff, Will Sharp.
He's an interesting guy. He's a writer as well, Anyway, so that is the premise of the film. James and I went to see this at the London Film Festival, and we should say from the start that James and I feel like I want to say is I feel very interested in this film because you and I both have Polish heritage. You Polish Jewish, Polish Catholic, and it kind of speaks to our kind of generational thing. So from that point of view, I was always interested to see this movie. Anyway, that's A Real Pain, James.
Totally, and there's this thing of always like growing up, you're always presented with a lot of this information and a lot of these stories, and you're often. It's something that's generations apart from your life and your existence. But the big question is like, well, what am I meant to do with that information? Am I meant to mourn? Am I meant to grieve every single day? Am I meant to move on from my life? How do I remember it? Should I remember it? And what sphere should I remember it? And that ultimately is like, in a nice way, the rambling articulation that Jesse Eisenberg in this film is trying to do. You know, we talked about Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin playing similar versions of themselves, which is definitely true. And you've seen them do these types of performances before. But I think this is an entertaining movie that's funny, and I think it's them really playing to their strengths. And I think they're actually perfectly cast in this movie, which is no doubt written and designed for those two. I've seen Jesse Eisenberg do a couple of interviews of what it was like working with Kieran Culkin, who's been acting since he was a child, brother of Macaulay. And he's talked about how Kieran Culkin basically doesn't read scripts. He's very chaotic. He has this energy, which you can really see in the performance he's playing, where Jesse Eisenberg is nervously directing this movie, and he realizes that on the big day of a monologue that Kieran Culkin's doing, he hasn't looked at the script. Jesse Eisenberg is like, "Oh my God, you haven't read the script? Like, no, we'll get you one. Take mine, please read it." But then he reads the moment and he doesn't. Apparently, he just gets lines like that, and he's able to deliver these moments with a real raw authenticity. And I think that's on display for Kieran Culkin, and they comedically play off each other very well. There's a great airport comedy bit in the opening. I think you can really tell that Jesse Eisenberg has a really insightful influence on his filmmaking, and you can tell that he is asking these questions. And one of my favorite parts reflecting on the film is that, like when you ask a rabbi a couple of questions, he's not going to answer it. He's instead going to leave you with a few more questions itself. The film doesn't actually try to solve the problem of how do you actually, it doesn't solve any of the characters' problems, and it doesn't try to solve the issue that I think this film is asking. I like that when the film, gets to the more darker aspects of revisiting their history, the film makes a very conscious choice, both in its dialogue, to go, do you know what, I'm going to let this moment speak for itself, because I think it does, and instead it actually just shows you through that moment. I think Will Sharp says that. So I really enjoyed it. I think it portrays that that kind of thing where you have a member of your family who's both frustrating and lovable.
Yes.
And it sort of articulates why you would still want to be with them despite them being very flawed. And yeah, I enjoyed it. Nice bit of like a sort of descent down into Polish heritage and architecture and music and all of that. And I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. I liked it too. I think just to begin with Kieran Culkin, like he's a great doing a fantastic performance in this, and he is so enrapturing, and their chemistry and their sort of
Really
interaction is really nice. And I like the fact this is kind of this neat, tight film with these supporting casts. Perhaps I would have liked a little bit more breadth in the drama to have rested. Perhaps just I find a lot of the drama sometimes rests on Kieran Culkin's shoulders.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And I would have. There's a hint about halfway through where they start to explore how Jesse Eisenberg's character feels about things, and I would have liked a little bit more of that to balance it out, because just a couple of times I felt like I was watching the characters, watching Kieran Culkin's character happen, a sort of a reactionary sense. However, he's very good. All the performances are very good. You mentioned about Poland there. I actually found it incredibly refreshing for Poland to be shown as the kind of modern country it is. I think
very underexplored in cinema, if at all.
I think it's very, which is a shame, because Polish cinema has a very rich heritage and history, and I think there's this sort of like kind of outdated negative stereotype that a lot of people have about Poland. But Poland in this is very quaint and beautiful and interesting and historic, and I found that very refreshing to see.
Oh, sorry, there's a particular scene when they're showing, he's doing a voiceover about hidden history and these places which have been redone over. But if you look closely, you can see the remnants of like old synagogues that are now dentist shops and like pharmacies, which used to be this. And I'm like, oh, that's such a different way to frame the city, which I really enjoyed.
And particularly Lublin, where they go to, looks really, really pretty. It's a film about generational trauma and generational guilt, and this kind of a real pain title is a nice double entendre, which is like, on the one hand, Kieran Culkin can be a real pain, but also it's about like, first of all, how pain is almost essential to human experience, to actually giving it meaning and life. And there are a lot of times when Kieran Culkin is feeling pain greatly and very rawly. His experience of life is incredibly raw, whereas Jesse Eisenberg's is much more closed off and sheltered and protected. Yeah. But there's an argument that the film kind of makes that Kieran Culkin's experience is there, but it's more true. And there's also the kind of point about the mental anguish and the mental health pain that Kieran Culkin is going through. And I'm sorry, I'm not using their characters' names purely because I would forget it, and I realise this film isn't out yet, so I'm going to keep using the actors' names. The mental health anguish that Kieran Culkin's character is going through, how that juxtaposes with the kind of distanced pain and trauma that their grandmother went through in the Holocaust, and can those two things be reconciled? Is it indulgent to have something that is that even though what's more real? The massive generational trauma three generations back, or the immediate mental health pain that he's experiencing.
And they also are losing and gaining different parts of other life as well. Like on one hand, one of them is very dismissive of certain things, and the other one is actually able to connect with things in a much more shocking and realistic way. But on the other hand, he puts off a lot of people. So it's this like they both are getting different things out of each situation.
Yes, and the film, through Kieran Culkin's character, asks uncomfortable questions, important questions. There's a scene where Kieran Culkin sort of says, "We're traveling in first class. What? Doesn't that feel really strange? On a train. We're Jews in Poland. Shouldn't we be doing this?" And it starts as kind of like a joke, but then it becomes quite uncomfortable, and it's interesting. And I like the way the film kind of has, as you say, kind of a rambling discussion. It doesn't. I would have perhaps liked it to have built to more of a kind of real moment of profound or a really landed a point, but I think that's also not in this film's character. I like the fact it's kind of a bit like a tour, is a discussion, is a pointing things out. It's tragicomic, which is it's the type of film I absolutely love. Actually, one of my favorite lines in it I thought was really good is that they're walking in this park. He said, "You do realize that if it wasn't for the Holocaust, we would be living here with long beards and would be allowed to be taught to women." And Jesse Eisenberg's character says, "It's like, there but by the grace of no God." And I love that. I thought it was so smart. It's a really great, interesting way of engaging with this subject matter. It's gentle, it's interesting, and I think people should check it out. It's also delightfully like a 90-minute movie, a really sort of travel size.
The ending and not necessarily solving its problems was part of what I think really gave the rest of it clarity to me.
Yeah.
And like you said, like a tour, it's
Yeah.
not here to like sort of complete anything that was unsaid. It's like, these are the questions we have to ask. I'm not going to try and solve that for you or tell anyone who's watching how to live or how to remember or how to grieve or how to deal with their own loss. It's like, here are two different types of people who are confronted with a situation and their specific story and how they might fail to do it or do it themselves. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. Who is a filmmaker like Jesse Eisenberg, who is of close to our generation, to make that statement? I'm like, that's a really smart way to play the film in a way that if that had been done differently, it could have really irritated me or other audience members. And I thought that was a smart way to go about it. And then like between the two of them, they're not necessarily resolved characters, which I quite like.
They've had experiences, somewhat changing, but also somewhat not.
Like asking a rabbi a question, you'll get more questions.
Yeah. I also like that there is elements like they're trying to track down their grandmother's house in this.
Yeah.
And then I've been back to Poland and we went on this family trip to find my granddad's village and all that stuff. And what I love is the film kind of captures how you can build these things up in your mind as well, your perception of family history. And then the reality of it is, it's not even that it's different from your perception, but it's like you forget that things are everyday and that they are mundane. And there's this sort of moment of mundane everydayness crashing into their sort of built up family moment, which I thought was really interesting, quite nice. So
also in cinema, when you want to film and capture a death camp, there's something very strangely plain and unremarkable about the quarters of a concentration camp or the gas chamber itself. And on one hand, you can stare at it and go, I'm looking into the eyes of death itself, a funnel from which many were lost. But also there's something strangely plain about it, like bring up the zone of interest again, which we talked about in the main episode, like the matter-of-factness with which that film shoots Auschwitz towards the end, right? And then this film also loses all of the dialogue, loses all of the music, and is only just the footsteps. It's on a sunny day, which is traditionally in cinema is not the pathetic fallacy you assume with that. So it's always a really difficult thing to capture, and I actually captured it very well.
I agree though, because it's shot in very kind of beautiful. It looks like film, doesn't it?
So,
And it's very kind of it's a very warm looking film and very aesthetically pleasing to look at. And that's true when they shoot the death camp. It's like a reminder that it actually works aesthetically to shoot it in that way.
To make it true to what you're seeing as an audience
It makes
member.
it more jarring.
The camera remained very still, and then it was mostly our characters walking through. It's always difficult to try and do, especially when you've been funny for most of your runtime.
There were some real good chuckles in there.
Really funny. Lots of really nicely capturing the random assortment of people that you'll find on a tour. Like there's a couple, a guy who's on a completely different Jewish journey to them, right? They have an interesting conversation of like, so you converted.
Yes.
And what do you think about religion? And there's like, religion was, it's a classic Jewish story of like, he's born into Judaism as a race, but doesn't necessarily feel a spiritual affinity for it. And you're asking that question. It's nice. It's an interesting clash of culture. It's cool.
So I know it's not out yet, but if anyone has seen it, also caught it at LFF, would love to know your thoughts at hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com.
Or if you're listening or watching this at the time.
Yeah, if you're listening to this in the new year, then
send in your
please
thoughts.
do.
We'd love to hear them. hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com.